Welcome to Tic-Tac Time for a Story, your home for true crime, unsolved mysteries, and real criminal stories from history. From infamous gangsters, to chilling murders, to the most dangerous outlaws the world has ever seen. Every story here is real. Subscribe and join us as we dive deep into the crimes that changed history forever. Our story today is about Bonnie and Clyde, America's most wanted lovers. America, the early 1930s. The country was broken. Families had lost their homes. Banks were collapsing. Millions of people were unemployed during what became known as the Great Depression. Across the country, anger and desperation spread like wildfire. And during this dark moment in American history, two young criminals would become legends. Their names were Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow, a young waitress from Texas, and a small-time thief with a violent temper. Together, they created one of the most infamous crime sprees in American history. Robberies, shootouts, murder, police chases. For over 2 years, they escaped authorities again and again, while newspapers turned them into celebrities. But behind the fame was a far darker story. Bonnie Elizabeth Parker was born in 1910 in Rowena, Texas. Her father died when she was very young, forcing the family to move to a poor neighborhood in West Dallas. Despite growing up in poverty, Bonnie was known as intelligent and creative. She loved poetry, fashion, and acting. Teachers described her as quiet but talented. Few people could have imagined that this small young woman would one day become one of the most feared outlaws in America. At only 15 years old, Bonnie married a man named Roy Thornton. But the marriage quickly failed. Roy disappeared into criminal activity and eventually went to prison. Bonnie never officially divorced him. In fact, when she died years later, she was still wearing her wedding ring from Roy. Clyde Chestnut Barrow was born 1 year before Bonnie, in 1909. He also grew up poor in Texas. Clyde's family struggled constantly for money, and he became involved in theft from a young age. He stole cars, broke into stores, and spent time with local gangs. Eventually, Clyde was arrested and sent to prison. And prison changed him forever. According to many reports, Clyde suffered brutal violence inside jail. He became filled with hatred toward the prison system and law enforcement. When he was finally released, he was no longer just a thief. He was angry, violent, and determined never to return to prison alive. Bonnie met Clyde in January of 1930 at a friend's house in Texas. The attraction was immediate. Clyde was charming, confident, and dangerous. Bonnie was fascinated by him. Friends later said the two fell in love almost instantly. But only weeks after meeting Bonnie, Clyde was arrested again. Bonnie reportedly helped smuggle a gun into jail so he could escape. Although he was quickly recaptured, their bond had already become unbreakable. When Clyde was eventually released from prison in 1932, the real nightmare began. Clyde formed a small criminal group later known as the Barrow Gang. The gang included Clyde's older brother, Buck Barrow, Buck's wife Blanche, and young gang member W.D. Jones. Together, they traveled across Texas, Oklahoma, Missouri, Arkansas, and Louisiana. They rarely stayed in one place for long. Most nights were spent sleeping in stolen cars or abandoned camps. Clyde preferred stealing Ford vehicles because he believed they were faster and easier to escape in. The gang robbed small-town banks, gas stations, grocery stores, hardware shops. Contrary to Hollywood movies, many of their robberies earned very little money. Sometimes they risked their lives for only a few dollars. But violence followed them everywhere. As the gang continued its crime spree, deadly shootouts became more common. Police officers attempting arrests were often killed. Civilians were sometimes caught in the violence as well. One of the most shocking moments happened in 1933 in Missouri. Police surrounded the gang at a tourist cabin hideout. A massive gunfight exploded. Bullets ripped through the walls. Glass shattered everywhere. During the chaos, Buck Barrow was critically wounded. Blanche Barrow suffered serious eye injuries from flying glass. But Bonnie and Clyde still escaped. Their ability to survive these encounters made them seem almost unstoppable. Newspapers across America became obsessed with Bonnie and Clyde. Photos of the couple posing with guns were discovered at one of their hideouts and published nationwide. The images shocked the public. Bonnie smoking cigars, holding rifles, smiling beside Clyde. To struggling Americans during the Depression, the couple almost looked like rebellious anti-heroes fighting the system. Some people admired them. Others feared them. But nearly everyone knew their names. The media helped transform two violent criminals into international celebrities. Law enforcement agencies across multiple states were under enormous pressure. Officers had been embarrassed repeatedly by the gang's escapes. Finally, former Texas Ranger Division Captain Frank Hamer was assigned to hunt them down. Frank Hamer was experienced, patient, and relentless. Unlike many officers before him, Hamer carefully studied the gang's behavior. He tracked their travel routes, family connections, gas station stops, safe houses. Over time, he realized Bonnie and Clyde followed predictable patterns. They often returned to familiar areas to visit relatives and trusted friends. Hamer knew this would eventually expose them. By 1934, the gang was falling apart. Several members had been arrested or killed. Bonnie herself had suffered severe burns after a car accident months earlier. Some reports say she could barely walk. The constant stress, exhaustion, and fear were destroying them. But Clyde refused to surrender. He reportedly told friends he would never go back to prison alive. Authorities now believed the only way to stop them was with deadly force. On the morning of the 23rd of May 1934, Bonnie and Clyde drove through rural Louisiana in a stolen Ford V8. Unbeknownst to them, 6 law officers were waiting in hiding near a small road outside Gippsland. The officers used a local truck as bait to slow the car down. As Clyde reduced speed, the officers opened fire instantly. Bullets exploded through the windshield. The sound was deafening. Witnesses later described the gunfire as non-stop. More than 100 rounds were fired into the vehicle. Bonnie and Clyde were killed within seconds. Their bodies remained inside the destroyed car as crowds quickly gathered around the scene. Some people even tried stealing pieces of clothing and glass as souvenirs. America's most famous outlaw couple was dead. News of their deaths spread across America within hours. Thousands attended their funerals. Reporters rushed to print every detail of the ambush. Even after death, Bonnie and Clyde remained celebrities. Over the decades, books, documentaries, and movies continued telling their story. The most famous was the 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde starring Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty. Hollywood transformed them into romantic anti-heroes. But the real story was far more violent. Behind the legends were real victims, real murders, real fear. Bonnie and Clyde were not fictional characters. They were desperate young people born into hard times, who chose a path of violence and crime. Nearly a century later, the names Bonnie and Clyde still survive in American history. A story of love, violence, rebellion, and death. 2 young outlaws who became immortal through crime. And a nation that could never stop watching. And just like that, another dark chapter comes to an end. But somewhere out there, more secrets remain hidden. More mysteries remain unsolved. And more terrifying true stories are waiting to be told. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Tick-Tack Time for a Story and turn on notifications so you never miss the next case. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.